Thank you. I'm looking at that sweater. Delaware Blue Hens. God love you. Don't let don't let Senator D'Alessandro see that. You know what I mean? We have this ongoing Delaware, New Hampshire thing in football. You know? I know you do. Anyway, isn't she incredible? I didn't know that was what was going to be said, but you know, one of the and by the way, what a voice. The folks, look. I want to get to questions as quickly as I can, but I think maybe what was just said is important to repeat. You know, think of all the people sitting around the kitchen table this morning who were trying to get by, who were dealing with real problems. How many conversations went on this morning in somebody's kitchen table in my home state or here, and somebody said, you know, mom and dad sitting there and say, who's going to tell her? Who's going to tell her she can't go back to UNH? We can't afford the next semester. We don't. We just don't have the money. We can't borrow it. Well, you know, you're going to have to, neighborhoods I grew up in, you're going to have to ride on those ball tires for another 5,000 miles. We just don't have the money right now. But you know, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You know, I come from a typical middle-class family, I guess technically lower middle-class family, that we moved from Scranton when I was a kid, when if you listen to Barack, you'd think I climbed out of a coal mine carrying a lunch bucket. But my dad was a white-collar worker, high school educated. His great regret he never got to go to college. And we moved to Delaware, because he had gone from grade school, I think 3rd grade to 10th grade in Delaware. Moved to a little steel town called Claymont, Delaware. And my dad, I hadn't planned on talking about this, but my dad used to always say when there was a recession, someone in the extended family or someone in the neighborhood, they were the ones that got laid off. And my dad would always use the following expression. He'd say, I promise you, give me a word to this. He'd say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about your self-respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. And mean it. Well, there's an awful lot of folks who, when we had to move from Scranton, my dad made what I call the longest walk any parent has to make, up a short flight of stairs to say to the kid, sorry, honey, you can't go back to Cooper School. You can't play in that Little League team. You're going to go home and you're going to live with Grandpa for a while. But everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. I remember my dad saying, you know, it's only 157 miles, and I'll come home every weekend. Didn't realize as I got older how much of his pride it probably took away to go to my father-in-law and say, Ambrose, you know, can you keep Gene and the kids? It'll take me about a year, but I'll come home every weekend. I promise I'll pay you back. But he believed it could be done, and he did it. We got down there, and after 3 years, they were able to buy a house and a split-level home with 4 kids, and then a grandpop living with us in 3 bedrooms. And but it was, you know, my dad was able to keep the commitment. And but today it's getting awful hard for people because we reward wealth, not work. We're in a situation where it's about time we start to reward work and not just wealth. We have such a disproportionate allocation of income today that it's just not, it's just way out of whack. We don't have to punish anybody to make sure. There used to be a basic bargain in America that if you participate in the success of an enterprise you work with, you got to share in the benefits. Well, that's not happening today. I mean, it really isn't happening. Productivity went up. I don't want to sound like a wonk. I'm going to only take a second of this. But from the end of the World War II up until almost the early 80s, productivity went up 92%. Wages went up 94%. Since then, productivity, meaning the way in which you can build a product and get it out to the market and quickly, went up 68%. Wages went up 8%. What's wrong? What's happened? We've adopted a sort of a new notion in America. It's the Milton Friedman notion. The only obligation corporations have, and I come from the corporate state of America, Delaware, the only obligation they have is to their shareholders. They used to have an obligation that went beyond that, to their employees, to the community, that allowed them to have the wherewithal to be there. But that's changed. I have a cartoon in my office that Barack used to come in and turn around on the mantelpiece in the vice president's office. I still have it in my office at Penn now, although I'm no longer teaching at Penn, University of Pennsylvania. And it picture of a great big rotund guy in a black sweater, black turtleneck, black mask, is out of the New Yorker magazine, and a black beret. And there's sitting at an interrogation table, and there's a great big burlap bag on the table with a dollar sign on it. And he's looking at the interrogator and he's saying, how was I supposed to know he was the job creator? Since when do the people who make those automobiles are not job creators? Since when are the people who, in fact, harvest the grain out of the field, since when they're not job creators? Since when are the people who work for outfits not job creators? So folks, we got little things backwards a little bit here. And I think it's time we start to pay attention to what actually built the country. Wall Street didn't build America. They're not bad guys, but Wall Street didn't build America. The middle class built America. Given a chance, the middle class has never, ever, 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 ever let the country down. Never. And we're so well positioned if we use our heads to lead the 21st century and change the circumstances for people in this country. It's all within our power, but we can't do it, in my view, and I hope some of you are Republicans, we can't do it with this man as president of the United States of America. So first and foremost, to get anything done that any of us, all 98 of us are running for the nomination, the first thing we have to do is we have to defeat Donald Trump to be able to get any of the rest of this done. We can handle 4 years of Donald Trump with difficulty. I'm not being facetious when I say this. We can handle him but it's going to take a long time to put the country back together and to put the world back together. Not a joke. The only thing that I have more experience than every single person running for the office combined is foreign policy and national security. It's what I've done my whole life. That's why Barack asked me to be on the ticket. We're in trouble internationally. Our alliances are being frayed. His embrace of not only hate at home, but his embrace of thugs abroad is absolutely debilitating. I guarantee you, if he's elected, I hope you have to prove this, but he's elected 4 more years, there will be no NATO. There will be no international alliances that we relied on over the years for our collective security. Because what's he do? He talks about sending love letters to Kim Jong-un, who's a thug. Had his uncle's brains blown out sitting across the table. Had his brother assassinated at an airport. And what do you think it does to our friends in the region, our allies, South Korea, Japan, down in Australia, Singapore, when they see this embrace? But there's a lot we can do to fix it. And we can do it with a lot of hard work. But 8 years of Donald Trump will forever and fundamentally change the nature of who we are as a nation, at least for several generations. We have never peddled in hate as much as we have lately. And you think I'm exaggerating, but think about it, folks. What president has ever said when you saw people coming out of a field carrying torches, veins bulging, talking and chanting the same anti-Semitic bile that was chanted in Germany in the 30s, accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist, and a young woman gets killed opposing the hate. And and he's asked to comment on, what do you think, Mr. President? He said something no one has said all the way back to Andrew Johnson, who was impeached. He said there were very fine people in both groups. Not only shocked people at home, it stunned the world. I can't think of any comment a president has made about domestic policy that has generated a response from the Chancellor of Germany and others saying, what's going on? So folks, we got a lot of work to do. I'll conclude this, and we'll go to questions with this following comment. The next President of the United States, as a matter of fact, is going to inherit a divided nation and a world in disarray. And there's going to be no time for on-the-job training, for real. Every election requires different assets to be brought to the table at that moment in history. And you got to be able to know on day one, how to deal with the other side and begin to generate consensus, which can be done. Hard, but it can be done. And when you can't get the consensus, you go out and you defeat the other side by going out and just telling the truth like we did in 2018 and went into 24 states for 68, 65 candidates. And I went into the red states and the purple states. We won 41 seats. We beat Republicans in 41 seats because we said, you don't think we should have health care? Stand up and tell the folks you don't think we should have health care. We shouldn't cover pre-existing conditions. All the attacks on Obamacare. Well, guess what? We won. So it's not about going out and going after them in terms of their personalities. It's about going out and talking, debating the issues with them. And the American people know where Donald Trump stands. They know who he is. We got to let them know who we are, though. Got to let them know who we are. That we choose hope over fear. We choose science over fiction. We choose unity over division. And we choose truth over lies. Over lies. We got to be able to explain our position. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry for all of you so crowded having to stand, I apologize. But the last thing we have to do is on day one, the next President of the United States is going to have to be able to immediately command the world stage. There's no time for on-the-job training. Stand up and the rest of the world know who he or she is, knows what they mean, knows they keep their word, whatever they'll do, and knows them, the good guys and the bad guys. I've met every major world leader in the last 45 years because of the nature of my job. The only few I don't know personally are the President's cousin, the Prime Minister of England. I'm joking. And a few others, but I really mean it. We got to bring the world together, really and truly. Because if we don't, you create a vacuum, and you know who fills the vacuum. You're watching it happen. So with that, as my dear deceased mother would say, Joey, why don't you hush up and take questions? So I'm happy to take any questions anybody has, and I'm going to leave you, let you, boss, pick the people and hand the microphones out. Or we have any people with mics in the back? Okay.
Ask you your first question. As someone that didn't get past the 8th grade until I received my GED because I realized I had to be a role model for my children. I realized the importance of education, not just because you need a diploma to go to college or a trade school, but it also affects your self-esteem. I believe to even combat ending homelessness, we have to start providing our youth with a good education. That way they will have an opportunity to have a career and not just a job. They'll be successful and make enough that they won't become homeless. And I want to know what you would do to help our teachers and administration be able to provide the education our children deserve.
A really important question. My wife, who's not with me, actually I'm going to meet her. She was with me earlier today. She still teaches full-time in community college. She's cut back from 15 credits, which she taught all through my being vice president, not to 12 credits. As I point out, teaching is not what she does, it's who she is. She has an expression. Any country that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. And the fact of the matter is, you may remember that every time President Obama did the State of the Union as vice president, I sat behind him. He loved turning and saying, and Joe's going to do, without telling me that ahead of time. He thought it was just really funny. The Recovery Act for $90 billion, and Sheriff Joe's going to take care of that. Well, the point is that you might remember when he said, and Joe's going to go out and find out what the jobs of the future are. Now, the good news was that when he gave me that assignment, those assignments, he gave me presidential authority to do whatever I needed to do and task the administration. What we found out was, to make a long story short, that right now, in order to get a job today, 6 out of 10 people 6 out of 10 jobs require more than a high school education today. Anybody who thinks 12 years of education is enough in the 21st century, raise your hand if you think only 12 is necessary. The fact is, no. And so here's what I do. And I won't go into great detail unless you want me to follow up. I will want to get as many questions as I can. Number one, they're so-called Title I schools. You have a number of them here in the state of New Hampshire, all around the country, where there are neighborhoods where they have fewer resources than other neighborhoods do, other districts. We now spend $15 billion a year on Title I schools. I triple that to $45 billion a year, which I promise we can afford out of $1.65 trillion loophole budget we have, and a tax cut that he just gave for almost $2 trillion, $1 trillion of which went to people making the top 1/2 of 1% of the income in America. Now, if you take that from $15 to $45 billion a year, you're able to do a number of things. One, begin to pay teachers a competitive salary. If any of you graduates from here, graduate from Colby, and you end up going out and you have a degree in education, you're going to make 22% less than the same person graduating with another degree from this college or any other college, because that's the way we deal with teachers. We have to reward teachers. They're the single most important ingredient we have, because they are, we talk about our kids, they're all our kids. The children of America, the kite strings that are going to lift our national ambitions aloft, and teachers are the ones who are the ones that hold those strings, hold those kite strings. Single most important endeavor we can engage in. So it would allow those teachers to be competitive. They'll be able to have competitive salaries. I would also go out, and it would provide for tripling, it would provide for providing every single person in America who in fact be able to start school at 3 years old, 4 years, and 5 years old. Not daycare centers, education, because all the major studies done by the great universities points out, if a child, no matter what their background, starts off and has that early education, they increase exponentially their prospects of being able to succeed and go on and learn. It increases by over 50% their ability to graduate, et cetera, and stay out of trouble. Thirdly, what we have to do is make sure that we start to think about the jobs that are out there and have community schools where you coordinate in your school districts with the companies in the region that need jobs, the kind of jobs they need, and provide for people to be able to, while they're in high school, gain credits from the community college, so that when they get moving, they in fact already have a head start on what they're able to do. A lot of districts are doing that. It works, and that would be able to be done with this increase from $15 to $45 billion. But most of all, you hit on something that's really important. You know as well as I do that confidence matters. Confidence matters. And the longer you go on without the education you know other people have, you lose your confidence. You lose confidence what you're able to do. We have to instill confidence in these young people so that they know they're capable. And so the last thing, and even the schools that are economically distressed, we should provide advanced placement courses. We should provide the same courses that are available in other schools, in the school districts that have a more significant tax base in order to do it. Because all our children are capable of learning. And so there's so many more things, but when we get to school, we also should be able to provide right now, to send every person eligible for community college to school for free is $6 billion. Well, there goes that big spending Democrat, right? Well, guess what? I didn't know what it was because I was listed for 36 years as the poorest man in Congress, for real, and I've released all my tax returns. You can go and look at them, 21 years of it, okay? Being poorest man in Congress doesn't make you a poor man relative to the rest of the country. By the time I started off making $42,000 a year as a 30-year-old kid elected, and I think I left, there was over $100,000 a year people were being paid. But the point is this, that if in fact you take a look, I didn't know there was a thing called stepped up basis. Stepped up basis means if you have a capital, and I hope you'll know what it means. I didn't know what it meant at the time, because you have to have enough money to make a capital gain that it's going to allow you to cash it in. If you cash it in, and on the way to cash it in, you figuratively speaking get hit by a truck, and you leave it to your son or daughter, they pay no tax on it at all. It's not inheritance tax. It was a tax owed 10 seconds before you got hit by the figuratively speaking, by the truck. That means we collect $17 billion a year less out of $1,640 billion. Eliminate that one loophole, you can send every single person qualified to community college to school for free. And here's the other thing. How many of you people know somebody who was in their 40s or 50s, and because of the fourth industrial revolution and the whole idea of artificial intelligence and all the things going on, no longer have a job? We used to have over, just fewer than 2 years ago, 200,000 jobs in retail. They're all gone now. Whether it was Saks Fifth Avenue in Manchester, or if you had one, or Benetton outlet or whatever. Well, guess what? 200,000 people lost their jobs. They closed up. Why? Nothing bad. They're not bad people. Amazon. You all are buying online. So you get 200,000 people, average age 50 years of age, average salary $50,000 a year. Mostly all high school educated. What do they do now? You're 50 years old. What in God's name do you do? Talk about depression. That's why the suicide rate, by the way, is not that particular reason, but the suicide rate is highest in America between people between the ages of 45 and 55. Seriously. Highest rate of drug abuse between 45 and 55. Well, people don't know what to do, and we're not talking to them. We're not paying attention. And they're easily able to go back and be retrained to do other things, because there are over 100,000 jobs out there that are in the market right now that we don't have the talent for to be able to do it. Like, for example, knowing how to run a photovoltaic machine on a factory floor to make, solar panels. It takes about 18 weeks to learn that. You can do it. So there's a lot we can do. And think of all the people. How many of you guys or women know anybody who's over-the-road truck driver? Raise your hand. Well, it's one of the biggest professions around. Guess what? They're not stupid. There are a lot of like my friend Richie at home. They're not stupid, and they work like hell, and they make a good salary. You know, they read the press and hear the news. What's predicted? All trucking is going to be automated within, they said, 5 years. It'll take more than that. So you're sitting home and you're 42 years old, you're making a decent living, and all of a sudden you're being told, guess what? 5 years, you're not going to have a job. We got to speak to those folks. There's ways we can deal with this, and we're not doing it. There's more to say, but I've already said too much. Recognize anybody who you think should. Okay. Anybody in the back with microphones? Do we have any? Okay, great.
Going back to the economy, because the president, when he's in trouble, always touts the economy, how we're doing really well. And like you said about his tax cut, that's supposed to be a tax cut but isn't a tax cut, is really hurting the middle class. How do you propose to change all that for us?
Well, first of all, he talks about 3.5% unemployment and about how the economy has grown. Well, it's grown 100 months in a row, because about 80 of those months we gave him. We set it in place. And like everything he's inherited, he's screwing it up. No, not a joke. Think about it. So here's the deal. It's one thing to have 3.5% growth, but unemployment, 3% unemployment. But it's another thing if the people who are employed aren't being paid enough to be able to make a decent living. That's the issue. The issue is, how do you reward people who in fact have worked like the devil to get back in the deal? And there's so many of the things I just spoke about, one of which is to change the tax structure. Right now, we have a circumstance where I said we reward wealth, not work, okay? if you in fact are out there, if you are a fireman, you're a nurse, you're someone working. How do I get this up? If you're in that circumstance, you're paying a higher tax rate than someone making on Wall Street a bond trader. He may be making $10, $12 million a year, and they're paying a lower tax rate than you because of capital gains. Okay, 20%. Now, what we can do, I think everybody should be able to pay their fair share. And so I would make sure that the capital gains went back to the normal rate of whatever your tax rate is. Instead of paying at 20%, you pay, now I'm not talking about your home now. I'm talking about clipping coupons, and that's how you make your living. There's no evidence that it in fact increases productivity at all, number one. What it does mean, though, is that you are paying at a lower tax rate than someone who's breaking their neck. And so if you just make sure every single person in America, the very wealthy, pay back at the rate we was before, 39.8% federal taxes, and in fact you pay your capital gains at that rate, then guess what? It frees up billions and billions of dollars to be able to do the things that affect middle class lives, like being able to get your kid to school, like being able to make sure that you're in a position that you can take care of your health care bills. Make sure you're in a position where you can do things that affect the daily quality of life you have, which you can't do now. Make sure we deal with things like global warming, which is of a gigantic impact on everybody. And so, first of all, you change the tax structure, number one. Number two, you make sure that in addition to changing the tax structure, you don't have to punish anybody. If you're making $10 billion a year or $10 million a year, why shouldn't you be paying at 39% when a lot of people making a lot less are paying at 28%? What's the problem with that? It used to be that way, and we got a lot done. But the other thing is, we have to make sure that you start making sure that companies, and I come from, as I said, the corporate state of America, companies start to reward their employees in a way that is consistent with what they do. You know what companies did? All this time, corporations are making more money than the Lord Almighty is these days. And they have been for, that's a good thing on paper, right? Not bad. But guess what? What have they done? Instead of reinvesting in employees or expanding plant and equipment, what have they done? They have gone out and they've made sure that they bought back $1 trillion worth of their own stock. Why do they buy back their own stock? If we all have one share of stock and there's 400 people in this room, we got 400 shares of stock. If as a CEO, I make sure we buy back from you 200 of those shares, the remaining 200 stockholders they increase the value of that stock by somewhere between 50 and 100%. But guess how I get paid? I get paid because I get to take stock options as a CEO. 85% of my salary is based upon those options, not direct salary. And so there's an overwhelming incentive the way we have it set up to deal with not reinvesting in your employees, not reinvesting in product and equipment that create and generate growth. And so let's take a look at infrastructure. When you want to bring some new, and one of the things I did as vice president at the president's direction, we did a lot of work with when you had a governor who was engaging us, like Maggie and others. What we did, we brought in a lot of help to help you move in the direction of having high-tech industries come into the state. But what do people want to know when they want to come in and invest in your city or your town? Where's the nearest railhead? What's my access to interstate highway? Is there sufficient water? What am I doing? Is there sewer available? And so on. But we have a 20th century infrastructure. We rank something like 8th or 9th in the world in terms of transportation infrastructure. We need to invest so much more money in making sure that we're in ability to attract people, our ports, our airports, etc. But we're not making that investment. And therefore, we're not attracting the kind of business nationally and internationally we should. So there's a lot we can do to make sure that people's salaries are considered not by mandating it, just by making sure that instead of the corporate tax rate now, you know what it is? It's gone down from 38%, which Barack and I wanted to come down, to 21%. You got a whole lot of them are paying zero, like Amazon, zero. I think it should be raised back up to 28%, not to 38, 28%. Remain competitive internationally, and we should not reward companies for going abroad. They should be here. We should be buying things that the federal government is the biggest purchaser of all, that made in America. It means American jobs. It means Americans. We should not be signing trade deals that don't have labor and environmentalists at the table so that we know we're getting a fair deal. So there's a lot of practical things we're able to do to generate greater economic growth internally and greater job growth in America that relates to income. And by the way, some of you are not going to like this. The minimum wage should be $15 an hour. It shouldn't be what it is now. Nobody should be working 40 hours a week and living in poverty in America. Period. Anyway, there's more to say in that one too, but
I'll give it to my husband, Frank.
Good afternoon, Joe. You and I go back 30, 35 years. And the first two times that we met, since we met the first time, you recognized me. Today you didn't.
Oh, wait. Wife has to take a picture. He'll never forgive me. I love you, Frank. I love you, Joe. God bless you.
Back in 1987, I asked the then senator about his law school class and how he made out in law school, as I asked my doctors how you made out in medical school. Any of you can look up Frank Fahey or Joe Biden and you'll see what happened in 1987. He basically destroyed me. I had no intentions of asking a controversial question except I wanted information. I have said that to Joe since then. I love this man, and I think he will make a wonderful president as he did vice president. And I hope everybody in this room votes for him because he's the best person of all the candidates we have to choose from right now. I'm going to ask another question of you, Joe. If you would tell the group what you would do differently going back to when you were chair of Judiciary with Anita Hill.
you ask all the easy questions, Frankie. Frankie, baby, no wonder I love you. Look, I've spoken with Anita. The fact of the matter is that Anita Hill, I believed her when she came before the committee. I convinced her to come before the committee. I, from the beginning, believed that Clarence Thomas should not be in the court. I fought like the devil to keep him off the court. He won by a vote, by 2 votes, I think it was. And I've subsequently talked to Anita Hill. And we've talked at length about what would we do to change the process. She wasn't treated fairly under the rules of the committee. Just like if you saw what happened in the last hearing, how I met that witness as well, long after the fact, Plessy Ford, and she was destroyed in the hearings. And what we're trying to figure out is how would you change the rules of what could be asked and not asked and do it in a way that still allowed there to be legitimate questions being asked. And that's one of the things that we spent a lot of time working on. But I made a commitment after that. I made a commitment. I had already introduced the Violence Against Women Act, and I was determined to see to it that it became law. I committed that would happen, and I committed that we'd never have another hearing in the Judiciary Committee that did not have women on it. And I went out and I campaigned for 2 women to get, on the condition they'd come on the committee if they won. Carol Mosley Braun, the first African-American woman to be elected, as well as Dianne Feinstein. And they both made the commitment. They're both on that committee. But the problem is deeper. The problem is deeper than that. I got the Violence Against Women Act passed. I got 2 women in the committee, I might add, both of whom are supporting me for president. And the fact is that, but still, we have this system whereby it's hard as the devil to rule out of order a question about something that has to do, and you know this deal, that, okay, well, where were you? When did it happen? How did it do? It becomes he said, she said. And we even consider the idea, maybe you do that in camera, meaning in private. But she believes we shouldn't do it in private, that we have to just do it straight up. And so there's still a lot to do, but it gets down to basically one important thing, changing the culture about how, and I mean this sincerely, when I wrote the Violence Against Women, I said it's about you all know what the phrase rule of thumb means? A circumference of your thumb. It comes from English common law, because a woman was a chattel. We think this somehow from some strange culture. It's our culture. And you used to be able, a wife was a chattel, just like the cattle in your or the pigs or the goats or whatever you owned. And you're allowed to chastise your wife. So many women were dying that the Court of Common Law in England, I think it was 1390, 1395, changed the law. Said you couldn't, because so many women were dying for being beaten, you could no longer beat a woman with a rod thicker than the circumference of your thumb. We've got a gigantic cultural problem, how we deal with and how we view and how we treat women in America. It's America. It's not, this isn't a broad news thing. Us, we have a problem. And think about it. When I was holding those hearings, for example, I got a woman who wanted to testify was a woman who had been a model in New York City. You may remember this case. And she wanted to come and testify how she had been, her face had been slashed by an aggressor. And so she was a model in New York City, lived in a upscale apartment place. I think it was on the 50s or 60s in New York City, street. And she wanted to move from an efficiency to a 1-bedroom. Every time that she went to the landlord to see if she could get a 1-bedroom, what happened? He hit on her. So she said she wanted her deposit back and she was going to leave. She was in a shoot, meaning for whatever company she worked for, and a modeling shoot on the street somewhere in the 80s. She got a phone call and said, I have a efficiency, I have a 1-bedroom for you and you can have it. And she said, okay, because she was now only asking for her deposit back. She said, okay. He said, meet me in the restaurant bar that's in the first floor of that complex, an upscale place. You'd walk in, anyone would walk in. And so she went in and he hit on her again. And she got up and left and walked out, and he had hired 2 goons to follow her out. And they had razors and they slashed her face. And so she said she was coming and willing to testify about how this was. And I went to see her and I said, I warn you what's going to happen to you. You're going to become the victim. I hope you'll come. I'll do everything I can to protect you, but I just don't want you to walk into. And so I asked her the question. What did your mother say when you told her? Remember what her mother said? Why were you in a bar? What does that have to do with anything? Her girlfriends. How short was your skirt? What were you wearing? What did you say? Never the woman's fault. Never. Never, never, never. If in fact, because look, no means no, no matter when it's said. It doesn't matter when it's said. No means no. And you cannot consent if you're drunk. That's why I started the movement, It's on Us. I found out that, I checked, President Obama allowed me to bring the Violence Against Women office basically inside the Vice President's office to raise its profile. And I had a woman named Cynthia Hogan who helped me write the legislation years earlier to check constantly with the Bureau of Justice Statistics on what progress we're making. Well, there was 67% reduction in violence against women over the age of 30. Things were moving, a lot of progress. But what stunned me was women between the ages of 15 and 24, nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. 1 in 4 were victims of violence. Going on college campuses, 1 in 4. The main reason why women leave college campuses is not for grades, because of being victims of violence on campus. So I asked, we had a virtual town meeting. They said there were 30,000 people on the call, high school and college students, and I was asking them, what would you most want me to do? And I thought they'd say better lighting on campus, more campus police, et cetera, et cetera. You know what they said? They said, get men involved. And I was embarrassed I hadn't thought of that. So since then, I've been going on college campuses and saying, you have an obligation. We have to change the culture. If you see somebody, and most of these young women get abused on the first 3 months they're in their freshman year. A lot of it happens in fraternity houses. If you get a young woman drunk and inebriated and you see a brother walking her up the stairs, if you don't walk up and say, hey, sucker, not in my house, man. Not here. Not here. If you don't do that, you're a coward. But we have to change the whole notion here. The whole notion of what is responsibility. And so it's beginning to change, but it goes to the overall question you asked. I think we have to change the culture, and it's beginning to change. And we're going to go through excesses, and we're going to go through balancing this. It's going to take time, but we've got to keep moving in direction, because nobody, and by the way, it's not just women. I get criticized for calling the Violence Against Women Act. About 10% of the people violated on campus are men, and they're being violated by other men. And so we just have to keep at it. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for taking this question. We spend, as a country, substantially more, I can't give you the figure, you might know it, substantially more dollars per capita on health care than any country in the world. Yet we're ranked 37th in the world for outcomes. In a number of places, some areas it's worse than that, but 37th in the world. So I want to know, number one, what you foresee as a potential solution to that. The other side of that coin is we spend more than the next 10 nations and military. The next 10 nations, so Russia, China, South Korea, the next 10 nations combined, we spend more than all of them. And we fight endless wars. And I'd like to know what you would do about that. Thank you.
Well, they're actually related questions about how we spend money and what we do. Number one, we can, in fact, fundamentally change the cost of health care in America without having to tax middle-class people, without requiring everybody to give up their private insurance, by taking Obamacare, reconstituting it, and extending it and providing a public option that's available that, in fact, is Medicare if you want it. You can keep your insurance if you like it. Anybody who wants to, in fact, change can change and move into this proposal where you have no deductible beyond $1,000, and we significantly lower drug prices by setting up a commission like in other places where in any new drug, if you're the sole provider of that drug, the price gets set by a panel of experts based on what you've invested in providing that outcome, and you cannot raise the price of that drug beyond the cost of inflation as long as that drug is the same drug. You see what's happening now. Thirdly, we make sure that we're in a position that, and that will cost a lot of money, by the way, when I'm proposing. It will cost about $720 to $750 billion over 10 years. But it will not cost, if you do Medicare for all, $3.4 trillion a year. And it will significantly increase, as all the studies are showing, including a recent one that's come out, and that in fact it will cost middle class taxes to go up, and you'll in fact paying more than you'd be saving by having Medicare Medicare available to you. So what I propose is taking Obamacare and making it Biden care by adding a public option. No, I really mean it, because I was there when we passed that. I broke my neck getting it passed. It's hard, and we tried that. You had 5 Democratic presidents try to do it and couldn't get it done, and we got it done without a single Republican vote. Whereby you, in fact, significantly, you provide a public option, meaning a Medicare-like option available to if you want to buy into that, and if you qualify for Medicaid, you automatically are eligible, even if your state doesn't provide it for you, to be into that plan for nothing. So there's a lot of things we can do. In addition to that, what we do is healthcare is personal to me. It's my family's been a significant consumer of healthcare, and so one of the things we can do is we can make significant progress on one of the major drivers of cost, cancer, by changing the way in which we deal with cancer, by investing, for example, if we invest $5 billion a year in cancer research, we can move close to curing some of the 204 distinct different types of cancer. I won't go into the detail, but for example, we can now do 1,000,000 billion calculations per second. So if you have cancer, we find the cancer cell. We can do a cancer genome for $1,000. We can find out precisely the cancer you have, where it is. Imagine if we're able to take every cancer genome that has been sequenced, put it in one place, we'd be able to, in fact, find out, because our ability to do the calculations that we can do more rapidly than you could have with 20 Nobel laureates spending 10 years on trying to why the technology, why the particular treatment for you and you with the same exact cancer, why you survived and you didn't. This is really, really tough but doable stuff. So in addition, if you talk about the Defense Department, it is true. We have a military budget, and a military that is larger than the next 9 nations in the world. And there is a reason for that. The reason for that is that we also have, there's no other nation that's an ally whose overall economy can remotely approach what we have. And what we've done is we've provided for the security of not only the United States, but we've provided for the security of our friends and allies around the world who also are chipping in. The president treats the way we deal with NATO now like it's a protection racket. If you do not, in fact, put in more money, then what we're going to do is we're not going to keep the sacred commitment we made to you that, in fact, we will come to your aid if you're attacked, and you'll come to our aid if you're attacked. Folks, look, there's a reason why we haven't had a third World War, and that is because we decided after World War II, our parents and our grandparents decided that what we're going to do is we can't avoid being dragged into a war if it occurs in Europe. It's virtually impossible for us to avoid it. So we set up NATO not just to keep the, quote, Soviet Union at the time from being able to invade Eastern Europe and Western Europe, but we set it up so that no one nation could gain so much authority and power that they could, in fact, start another war in the region like they have in the past. And when you're part of NATO and you all agree to the same set of rules, then in fact you're all bound. And no one nation is about setting up guardrails to prevent the abuse of power. That's what happened before. That's what happened before. Now, imagine if we didn't have the capacity, and thank you for your service, pal. Imagine if we didn't have the capacity to be able to have the ability to project force around the world in the Pacific. Who keeps open the sea lanes, and how does that work? How does that work? How do we end up having any type of security when, in fact, you know, I come out of the Vietnam era, and one of the reasons I ran for the Senate as a 29-year-old, I was tired of us being the policeman of the world. But here's what we do now. Because we have significantly reordered our priorities so that we focus more on not standing armies. The president asked me to get, when we got elected, get the 150,000 combat troops out of Iraq. And we did. We don't need large standing armies. We don't need them in Afghanistan or anywhere, but we do need the ability to have special forces that can train and coordinate the 61 nations we put together to deal with stateless terrorism around the world. And so there's a significant, we need to have a situation where we can have the ability to defend against incursions that are also nuclear in nature. That's why I was part of the reason we negotiated that new arms control agreement with the Russians, which they're violating right now. It really matters. It really matters. And so there's a lot of things that we can do, but if you take, let's go back to the healthcare question and the cost of everything. If we eliminate the entire federal budget, if we took down we ripped down the Pentagon, we got rid of every single solitary troop, ship, plane, and everything, that would only pay for 4 months of Medicare for all a year. 4 months a year. So the idea that the entire federal budget now on a yearly basis doesn't equal $3 trillion a year. We could wipe it all out. And you still don't have enough money to pay for Medicare for all now. So the point is, we don't have to get there to do it, but here's what we have to do. We also have to change, and we have to spend more money, in my view, on keeping our commitment to I always get in trouble for saying this, but we only have one sacred obligation as a government. We have a lot of obligations to care for the elderly, our children, the poor, etc. The sacred obligation we have is when we send a man or woman to war, we give them all they need to be able to do the job and protect them. And we guarantee that we'll take care of their families and them when they come home. I carry with me every single day my schedule. The national press who follows me around are tired of me saying this, but every single day, hope I have my schedule card with me here. Every single day, take a look at my schedule and open the second page, if you don't mind. What's that say?
What, right here, daily U.S. troops update.
And what it carries, I have them check the Pentagon every morning. Troops died in Iraq and Afghanistan. 898. Not roughly 6,000. Every one of these fallen angels left behind an entire community, a family. They've left behind dead, wounded Afghanistan, Iraq, 52,954. You know what this doesn't count? It doesn't count the 300,000 people coming home with post-traumatic stress. You know, there's more people, active and retired military, committing suicide than on a daily basis than being killed in all the wars. And why? Because we're not providing the wherewithal at the VA or other places to provide for the need that exists. It is an expensive proposition. So it's complicated, but if we walk away from our commitment, we will have Trump going to May Day parades with Russia for a long time. Anyway, yes, sir.
So the Amazon rainforest has been on fire for months. California wildfires have torn apart the states. Extreme weather has dropped in the Midwest and caused hurricanes in Puerto Rico and Texas. Countries like India and China are increasing pollution, both air and trash. I believe that these struggles are the greatest struggles that our generation will face. And how can you, if you're elected president, ensure our future?
They affect my generation too, and everybody else's generation, but you're right. Do you realize Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, Brazil is what they call a carbon sink. Brazil, the Amazon forest in Brazil takes more carbon out of the air into the soil than if we eliminated every single automobile in the United States of America. Every single automobile. Allowing the devastation of that forest to continue makes absolutely no sense at all. But, because this administration doesn't believe there is a global warming problem, And because he's walked out of when they had the G8 and the G20, those meetings of all these experts, he wouldn't even sit in on the portions relating to climate change because it doesn't exist. What's happened? There is no pressure on Brazil to be able to go in and stop the development that's taking place, because what they're doing is they're clear cutting this stuff. Because they say, and I've been to Brazil a lot when I was vice president and chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, what they're saying is a simple problem. They said, look, you guys took down all your forests, you developed, so you're telling us we can't. So what's the story here, Jack? Well, the story is what we should be doing is what I proposed and we proposed. And that is we should be paying them not to, in fact, take down those forests because it affects us directly. And we should be compensating them to keep that rainforest in place. I was one of the first people to come along trading the idea of maintenance of your facilities in the trees and et cetera in your country, and we'd pay you not to take them down like we did. So what I've done, first thing I would do as president is rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, which I helped put together, okay? Number one. Number two, and you're pretty smart, what you're right about is that all these countries are now violating the commitment they made, particularly China in their Belt and Road proposal. They are selling and generating coal-fired facilities coming out of their country in other countries as if they're keeping their commitment and they're not. And so what I would do is I would call a meeting of the 100, not a joke, 173 nations that signed on and say, you got to up the ante. Here's the deal. And when you don't up the ante, here's the price you're going to pay. The rest of us are not going to import your products. The rest of us are not going to import. If you are exporting carbon and you're not meeting your requirement, then we will, in fact, it will cost you more to not export, to export, than it will be to not export. Thirdly, what my proposal calls for is, and by the way, the United States, and you hit it, the United States makes up 15% of the world's problems. If we get to net zero emissions tomorrow, 85% of the pollution that is melting the polar ice caps, raising levels along our seaboard, causing these storms and these rash things that are happening, they'll continue. So we've got to get the rest of the world in on the deal. But we've lost all our credibility to be able to do that because, number one, this administration doesn't even know how to deal internationally. I'm not being a wise guy. I'm being deadly earnest. They've never put together anything that, in fact, anybody else can, in fact, look to and say, I trust they're going to do what they say and they know what they're doing. And so what we have to do is we have to bring the rest of the world along because the agreement we put together said that as science progressed, you'd have to up your ante if the science said you're running out of more time. So two things I've done at home. I set out a plan that every major environmental group says is they give it a B+ to an A+, that it calls for net zero emissions by 2050, but locks in by 2030 institutional changes that can't be altered. For example, if tomorrow we in fact invested in, which we tried to do in our administration, high-speed rail. The reason it has to be high speed is the way you take cars off the road is, in fact, if you can get there in essentially the same amount of time if you are on a going by rail. There are 5 corridors in the United States of America that we could take significant portion of the traffic off the road, and it issues about 1/50th of the pollution that comes from driving with automobiles there. We should make a transition right now to and rewarding farmers who in fact plant crops that absorb carbon from the air and pay them for those crops. Pay them for what they're doing with their land. They can become the first group in America that in fact is a net zero emissions from farming, even counting what you deal with. In my state's a big farming state. I know people think Delaware's not, but it is. The Delmarva Peninsula is chickens are a $5 billion industry. There's an awful lot of chicken manure. Well, just like what's happening with cattle. And so we can, in fact, we should be doing the research I provide for in the $1.7 trillion plan over 10 years to deal with global warming, to get us to, I mean, by 2050 to get to eliminate global warming in America. I provide for $400 billion for research and development and new technologies that in fact are going to be the things that prevent us. For example, every new highway is built that when I'm president, and I promise I can get this one done, we're going to have 500,000 charging stations along those highways because we should own the electric vehicle market. Not only that, it would create millions of new jobs, high-paying jobs. We should own the electric vehicle market. The technology is available and we can do it. But guess what? Just like my grandfather Biden, who I never met, he died 3 days or 6 days before I was born. My grandfather, the reason he ended up going from Baltimore to Scranton, to York to Wilmington to Scranton was he worked for a guy named Blaustein of the American Oil Company out of Baltimore. They were opening gas stations. People didn't want gas stations in their neighborhood. You mean you're going to bury all that oil underneath the ground near me, etc.? Well, imagine what happens if we didn't have gas stations available for combustion engines. Well, we don't have. One of the reasons why we're not investing in electric vehicles is not only we're increasing the science and technology and battery technology, but guess what? They weigh a whole hell of a lot of money, pounds. And people aren't going to go unless they can go 300 miles or 500 miles when they go across the country or travel, unless they can plug into a station just like, and you may think I'm all crazy, but go to any big city in America. Look at all those scooters. Well, those scooters, you just plug in and you tap a number. And guess what? You can leave it where it was. And so we have the technology to do so many things. And we should be continuing what I would do. I continue the tax credits for if you, in fact, are going to go out and make sure that you invest in technologies that, for example, one of the great things that cause global warming is the heat and air conditioning that escapes from homes and from office buildings and the like. Every federal building should be net zero, and we should be able to provide for new windows, new doors, new facilities, so you keep inside the building all of the heat that is escaping, which causes more burning, and all the air conditioning. And it can be done. And people will do it if, in fact, they have a tax credit for going ahead and doing it. That's what we did, for example. As you might guess, a couple have spent a little time in Iowa, like we do a lot of time in New Hampshire. And here's the deal. You know, Iowa's created tens of thousands of good-paying jobs because of wind energy, because of solar energy. And our administration, when the president put me in charge of the Recovery Act, which was $90 billion, we invested more money in renewable energy than any administration in history. We brought down the cost of solar energy and wind energy so that on a BTU unit, it's cheaper than burning coal today. No one's going to build a new coal-fired plant. We should shut down the ones we have, but no one's going to build a new one because guess what? It costs a lot more money to run them. It costs a lot more money to make it work because now there's competitive prices for solar and wind. We should triple, including off your shore and off the shore of Delaware, wind technology. Windmills. Tripling that would have an immediate impact on a lot of things. So there's a lot we can do today to set in place something that over the next 10 years, between now and 2030, gets so locked in that you have now the pathway to get to, and no one can come along and change what's happened in terms of this guy coming along and doing away with all the changes we made in terms of vehicle mileage. I mean, even the automobile industry objected to the president reducing the mileage of the so-called CAFE standards. You can now have automobiles that, in fact, consume a lot more energy, a lot more gasoline. Even the automobile industry said, no, don't do that. Don't do that. So there's a lot we can do, and we can do it quickly, but we've got to we can't get the rest of the world to act unless we demonstrate we are making the kinds of changes, and we should become the net exporter of the new technology that allows us to, in fact, reduce significantly in a major way the escape of carbon into the atmosphere. Anybody back here? You got a mic?
As far as
We have to wrap it up. I know you're like a big deal and everything, but your boss has told me I have to like wrap it up.
Okay, I'll try to answer yes or no. Fire away.
Ambassador Sondland seemed to have a selective memory loss. If you were to become president, would you use a different criteria as opposing to how much the person donated to that political party, Republican or Democrat, as appointing giving an ambassadorship?
Yes, 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 yes. And I think you'll find, not a joke, I think you'll find more of those people in the Democratic Party, hundreds of them, who are known for their foreign policy expertise, have endorsed me. Out of that group will be the ambassadors that I choose. Okay, anybody back here have a question all the way back, and then I have to leave. And I know the press has no questions. I mean, anybody? Because you've all been patient. Yes, ma'am. And then I'm going to get the devil out of here. I'm supposed to go to Vermont. Vermont.
Great state. Nice to meet you, sir. I have one simple question, Vice President.
Yes.
What's your criteria for picking a Vice President?
Are you available? No, look, I think that's a critical question, and on the way to going out the door, I'll answer it. I'm sorry, what is my criteria for picking a Vice President? First of all, it's presumptuous of me, work on those biceps, will you? It's presumptuous of me to be talking about a vice president because I'm not even a nominee yet. And when I talk about this, the press is going to say Biden is already talking about who his vice president is going to be and he's insulting everybody, et cetera. But here's the deal. I think that what I've learned from being a vice president, from a president who I thought was a great president, and that was that you have to be prepared as president of the United States to delegate significant responsibility, authority, not just responsibility, authority to the Vice President of the United States, because everything but locusts will land on your desk when you become, no, I'm serious. No one woman or man can handle the job by themselves without having someone, like it took a lot of courage for Barack to do it, when to turn over significant responsibility to Vice President and not have to check back, giving him authority. When he asked me to do a number of these things, I remember early on in the administration, I won't mention the person's name, I turned to somebody who was in the health area and I said, tell me when you're going to have an assistant for that position. And it was, I think, February the 7th. And he said, well, by January. I said, here's the deal. If you don't have it by March 1st, you're fired. He said, you can't do that. I said, go talk to the president. Well, guess what? In 7 days, we had somebody. Because it was just about not wanting to move. So you have to have somebody who is simpatico with you. A man, a woman, a person of color that's simpatico. That not only understands why you got elected and what you care about, but shares your view. And not just, it doesn't have to be tactically agree. Barack and I used to, as the president will tell you, argue like the devil. But we always did it in private. I had lunch with him once. I had lunch with him every day that we were in office together, when we were in town. And we would, because you don't want to, as a vice president, in front of other people, take on the president, even with the cabinet, and then, in fact, if it turns out to be wrong, or you just don't want to be in that position. So we would meet regularly, and we would occasionally holler at one another. When his friends asked, what's it like having Joe? He said, it's like having an older brother that he could talk to. So I want to have somebody who is comfortable enough, preferably, I have to admit, preferably a woman, that in fact is comfortable and has the same, is simpatico with me as to what my priorities are. We can disagree on tactic, but Barack and I never disagreed on the strategy. We knew ahead of time. We served together. We debated each other. We knew that we had the same positions. And the positions in broad strokes Where we disagree would be on tactic. On tactic. Well, tactically, and one of the reasons he asked me to be president was to make up for what had been a lack of experience of him dealing with the federal bureaucracy. Well, I need people who make up for many of my weaknesses. I need someone able to come in and take care. The thing about Barack was, he was always, everything was done in an orderly manner. Nothing. There was also a process we went through. I'll give you one example and leave. One of the things was that the question was, would we in fact change the law of don't ask, don't tell with the military and insist that LGBTQ people could in fact serve in the military? And I was arguing that we should just order it, flat out, just do it, Mr. President. And he was smarter. He came along and said, no, here's the process. I'm going to bring in the Joint Chiefs, tell them it's my preference, and give them 6 months to come up with what they think should be done. Well, guess what? His system worked, because by the time they went through the whole review and weren't ordered to do it, they came to the conclusion, and you had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff making one of the strongest statements anybody's ever made about why, LGBTQ people can shoot just as straight as anybody else. Not a joke. But had I done it my way and just ordered it by executive order, when this guy Trump came along, he'd be able to undo it immediately. But now the military signed on to it after doing significant studies and what it actually impacted on, and checking with the military and the folks in the field, and said, yeah, we're okay. So, I have a lot of shortcomings. And every president has shortcomings. I would try to find somebody who, number one, agreed with me in principle and philosophically where I am, but also was someone who, in fact, could make up for some of my weaknesses, and someone who I could just simply trust. I didn't have to go back because the president didn't have time. And so that's what happened. Anyway, I guess I don't have time. Anyway, thank you all so very, very much. It's a great crowd. I appreciate it.